Well, the long Labor Day weekend that we are all looking forward to cannot come fast enough for Donald Trump. And so today, he took the day off. Donald Trump did nothing today. He wasn't publicly seen anywhere today, perhaps because his 79-year-old swollen ankles are bothering him, or maybe he just couldn't really walk or stand up very long today, something like that. Who knows? We don't know. Maybe he couldn't speak coherently today. Maybe it was one of those days. Actually, we do know about that. Donald Trump has never had a single day in his life as a politician when he could speak coherently about anything. That is a cognitive test that Donald Trump began publicly failing 14 years ago at age 65 in 2011 when he started lying about President Obama's birth certificate. The only thing on Donald Trump's public schedule today, which is to say the schedule that was made public, was a 4 p.m. thing in the Oval Office. So Donald Trump's workday was officially scheduled to begin at 4 p.m. today. And it was scheduled to last for only a few minutes, because the event on Donald Trump's schedule at 4 p.m. today was the swearing in of the Trump ambassador to the European Union, who is, of course, an unqualified rich guy who used to run fast food chains. At 4 p.m., a 4 p.m. start to the workday is something you might schedule for a 79-year-old still recovering from jet lag after crossing 4 time zones back and forth to Alaska on Friday, after Donald Trump spent the week last week saying publicly that he thought he was going to Russia. At 6:32 p.m. today, the White House released this proof-of-life photograph that appears to be Donald Trump standing deep in the background there, doing absolutely nothing, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio swears in the new ambassador. And so we have no evidence today that Donald Trump was even capable of speaking. The Vice President of the United States got a speaking role today in the Trump presidency, but he had to share his speaking role with a member of the cabinet, which is not so unusual. There have been some events in the past where a vice president speaks and the Secretary of Defense speaks, with the vice president, of course, getting to speak the longest. But in their opening remarks today, the vice president and the Secretary of Defense had to share microphone time with someone with a job title who has never been given a speaking role in any previous presidency, a Deputy White House Chief of Staff. In the history of that job title, no Deputy White House Chief of Staff has ever had a speaking role at a public event where the vice president was speaking. But today, Donald Trump humiliated his vice president by pulling the puppet strings and making sure that his Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, spoke longer than the vice president did in their opening remarks when they all made a clownish visit to Union Station in Washington, D.C., the iconic Amtrak railroad station through whose glass doors Jimmy Stewart first saw the Capitol Dome when he arrived in Washington in Frank Capra's classic film, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. There were no soldiers in the shot when Jimmy Stewart's character, the newly appointed Senator Jefferson Smith, arrived at Union Station. And there have never been troops at Union Station in the decades of both the 20th and 21st century that I've been arriving at and departing from Union Station in Washington, D.C. I've never once seen a crime committed there. I've never once felt even slightly at risk there. I don't know anyone who has. Before jet travel, most United States senators arrived in Washington at Union Station and departed from Washington at Union Station. One United States senator whose career crossed from the 20th century into the 21st century passed through Union Station to and from work every Senate workday of his 36-year career as a senator. Senator Joe Biden was in a position to have security at Union Station strengthened if he thought it was necessary. For 36 years, Senator Joe Biden walked through Union Station alone to and from the Amtrak train that delivered him home to his children in Delaware every night. That Amtrak station is one of the jewels of the Amtrak system, It is the home of 56 stores and restaurants, including the eyeglass shop Warby Parker, where I got these, and other shopping mall chains. It now has a Shake Shack, the fast food chain that has been surging in the Northeast in recent years. Companies like Warby Parker and Shake Shack do not locate their stores in high crime areas. They prefer to locate their stores in zero crime areas like shopping malls. And Union Station is basically a shopping mall with train tracks. Union Station is safer than the elementary schools of this country where our children go to school every day. It's safer than the high schools of this country where our children go to schools every day and where children are subjected to the assault weapon fire of mass murderers every year in our schools, with body counts that should be a call to action for anyone working in government. But not one Republican elected official in Washington has ever tried to stop mass murderers in our elementary schools and our high schools and colleges. They've never said, let's get the troops in there. Not one of them cares about that kind of mass murder enough to ever try to do anything about it. But J.D. Vance took his campaign for the Republican presidential nomination to Union Station today to bring Shake Shack burgers to the National Guard troops who are foolishly now deployed to Union Station to do absolutely nothing, to stand there with the most humiliating assignment ever given to American soldiers in uniform in this country. That was the stunt of the day. That was today's attempt to distract from the Epstein files and how many times and in what ways Donald Trump's name appears in the Epstein files. Donald Trump's Attorney General promised to release the Epstein files before she went to the White House to tell Donald Trump how many times his name appears in the Epstein files and in what ways his name appears in the Epstein files. And then suddenly the Attorney General and the Trump FBI director changed their minds about releasing the Epstein files. Last night on this program, Congressman Robert Garcia made news by revealing that in the secret testimony Monday to the House Oversight Committee, former Trump Attorney General William Barr said it is fully within the power of the current Attorney General to release every word of the Epstein files.
He indicated that the current Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has it within her power to release those files right now. And so we're once again saying she should release the entire files. And this idea that she's going to roll out some of it on Friday and then continue this kind of planned stage rollout is not acceptable.
And today, a federal judge pointed to the Epstein files when the judge rejected the Trump Justice Department request to release the grand jury transcripts in the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. The judge made it clear that the grand jury transcripts do not include any witnesses other than an FBI agent who summarized the information that they had obtained from witnesses and documents in their investigation of the case. That was enough to get an indictment of Jeffrey Epstein for his sex trafficking and raping children. Today, in his decision, Judge Richard Berman wrote, a significant and compelling reason to reject the government's position in this litigation is that the government has already undertaken a comprehensive investigation into the Epstein case and, not surprisingly, has assembled a trove of Epstein documents, interviews, and exhibits, and the government committed that it would share its Epstein investigation materials with the public. The government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files and materials dwarf the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials. The government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public of the Epstein files. By comparison, the grand jury motion appears to be a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files in the government's possession. And so there is a federal judge saying in writing today that the legal maneuver that Donald Trump personally announced on social media of asking for the release of the grand jury testimony was nothing but, in the judge's words, a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files. That's what we said it was on this program the night Donald Trump said that they should release the grand jury transcripts. We said that was just a Trump diversion. Tonight, a federal judge has found that Donald Trump and his attorney general were just playing their diversion game by asking for the grand jury transcripts. That is exactly how we labeled that request for the grand jury transcripts that very night when Donald Trump announced it. The judge wrote, in February 2025, the government, as noted, was prepared to release their Epstein files to the public. But then on July 6, 2025, the government announced it would not make the files available to the public. The information contained in the Epstein grand jury transcripts pales in comparison to the Epstein investigation information and materials in the hands of the Department of Justice. The judge wrote about something that Donald Trump and the Attorney General obviously care nothing about, because the Justice Department made no effort to even consult with Jeffrey Epstein's victims before requesting the release of the grand jury transcripts. And it is required by law that they consult with those victims before asking to release the grand jury transcripts. And Donald Trump's Justice Department did not do that. The judge wrote, there is another compelling reason not to unseal the Epstein grand jury materials at this time, namely possible threats to victims' safety and privacy. The court received a very compelling letter dated August 5th, 2025, from 3 leading victims' rights attorneys who have stated any disclosure of grand jury material, especially material that could expose or help identify victims in any way, directly affects the fairness, privacy, conferral, and protection guarantees